So the number 14 pick, should the Spurs select French big man Maxime Raynaud?
You are Locked On Spurs, your daily San Antonio Spurs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, welcome back to Locked On Spurs. We're at the Locked On NBA Network. I'm your host, Jeff Garcia, Spurs writer for Kansas City, San Antonio. Glad to have you all back. And you guys are the everydayers. We appreciate y'all stopping here at Locked On Spurs for all things silver and black. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, Kansas 5 Plus app, YouTube. You know where to go. When you're on the YouTube side of things, well, leave a comment. We might read it in a future episode of Locked On Spurs. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get themselves $200 in bonus bets when their first $5 bet wins. What are we talking about today? You can see on your screen, we're going to be diving more into the NBA draft and kind of honing in on the number 14 pick. And the French big man, Maxime Raynaud. Yeah, a lot of Spurs fans are really liking this kid. He's got the size. There's that Wemby connection, so much more. Should the Spurs use that 14 pick on him? We're going to be discussing that. Give the pros, give the cons, and then get into, at least one Locked On Spurs fan comment. We're going to do that, all that, and more. Let's go and bring in our guest. He is Matt Guzman with Spurs on Sports Illustrated. I would pick you at number 14, Matt. How about that?
Me?
Yeah,
you're not getting quite as much size, but I appreciate it.
What? I heard you got a sneaky handle there.
Yeah, I do. I have a good 3-point shot, good ball handle. I can get by you in the paint, promise. So.
See, I knew my scouting report was good. I knew it. Again, he is with Spurs on Sports Illustrated. Make sure to follow him on X at MattGZMAN. Now, Matt, he's a busy guy. He has things to do, people to see. So we're going to try to get through this episode as quick as possible. All right. So, Matt, let's dive into it. You're hearing, whether on social media, websites, forums, what have you, there's a big segment of Spurs fans that are looking at the French big man out of Stanford, Maxime Raynaud, as a possible selection for the Spurs at number 14. Not going to be number 2. I think we all know who that's going to be. But number 14, big man, there's pros and cons of that. So why don't we start off with the pros? And I'll kick us off real fast, and that is that he is just a big man. He fills the Spurs' need for that big man tandem that the Spurs need to back up Wemby. They don't have that. He's 7'1". What else we got here? Let's look at some of the numbers. Again, he did at Stanford. Did not quite hit the 3-point shot, about 35%. More on that later. But nevertheless, you're looking at a guy who averaged about 20 points per game, 10 plus rebounds per game, 1.7 assists, 1.4 blocks. Not a bad numbers there at Stanford. He has some good footwork, not the greatest, but he has good footwork. And he's definitely could be shaping up to a polished offensive player once he gets some time under his belt in the NBA should the Spurs select him. Now, at the draft combine, he played very well. I think he had like 20 points and 9 rebounds in a scrimmage. So there's that. And he's kind of moved up in the NBA draft projection. He was kind of projected to be a high second round. Now he's into the lower half of the first round. There's no doubt about it. He is a big man the Spurs could use to address their need. What else do you see as a pro for the Spurs picking him at number 14, Matt?
Yeah, well, one of the things that, you look at his stat line and instantly jumps out is that he averaged a double-double, 20 points, 10 rebounds. And I think that hitting a mark like that is something the Spurs would definitely utilize, definitely need next to Victor Wembanyama. And I think that's part of what's kind of gotten his draft stock to rise between, his size, obviously, his ability to, like you mentioned, not hit the 3, but, for how big for his size and for his position, 36%, you can't be terribly mad at that. Plus you have the double doubles. And I think it makes sense why his stock has been rising. But to me, the biggest pro is that he can get you rebounds and really kind of clean up the glass, especially if you're going to be running an offense with De'Aaron Fox and Devin Vassell, depending on who stays, who goes, you're going to need people to clean up the glass.
Yeah, exactly. He'd be entering the NBA at 22 years old. So he is a little bit more older player, quote unquote, older for NBA standards. And maybe his body is a little bit more adept to handling the physicality of the NBA. So that's a plus as well. Obviously, we can't forget the Wemby connection. Both French big men, both are good friends. You all seen that viral image of them two playing chess and everything. So there's that, bringing in somebody that Wemby knows, somebody that is from Wemby's home country. So there's that familiarity with Wemby, maybe making him a little bit more comfortable having Maxime in the roster. And again, the Spurs need depth at center, and he fills that void. Yeah, you bring in another big guy like that. That's another guy who could set the pick for players like Castle and Fox and maybe Harper. Yeah, wink, wink. So there's that. Now, Reynald is within their draft range at 14, although some feel that he may go, we should go past that, more on that later. But the thing about it, too, if the Spurs do want him, I guess this is a pro, Matt, they can definitely trade down to get him if they don't really cover that number 14 pick. Your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when you're looking at his draft stock being late lottery, I don't think anybody has him going top 10. So you're really looking at 11, 12, 13, whether those teams are going to look for him specifically. And I don't see it. Mm-hmm. I think the reason the Spurs have been rumored is because obviously, Reynald is hung out with Victor Wembanyama before. They both like to play chess. They're both French. It kind of makes sense. And so I think the hype and the buzz has started to go up a little bit with the Spurs. But I don't think any other team is looking to take him 11, 12, 13. Right. So, to your point, if the Spurs wanted to draft down, maybe add an extra pick down the road, an extra second round, couple second rounds, they're more than willing to. They'd likely be willing to do that, to add a little bit of draft capital, get the guy they want, and call it a day.
There's another thing that I guess is a pro. I guess we'll put in the pro pile right now, is that he is from Stanford. And who else is from Stanford? Mitch Johnson. So there's that connection right there, that Stanford connection with him and Mitch Johnson. Obviously, they're years and years apart from their time in Stanford, but nevertheless, perhaps Mitch Johnson feels comfortable enough bringing in the Stanford guy into the system. I guess, I don't know if this is a stereotype, Matt, but high IQ coming out of Stanford. I mean, he must be a smart kid to get into Stanford there. So there's that. So you got the basketball knowledge, you got the size, you got the height, you got a little bit of an older kid at 22, body already filled out, addressing the big man depth. To me, on paper, Matt, it makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, he fits the need of something they've been looking for the past couple of seasons. Obviously, they thought Zach Collins was going to be that traditional center next to Victor Wembanyama. Didn't quite work out. They thought maybe Charles Bassey could step in. He's just been kind of in and out with injuries, not necessarily his fault, but they're going to need to look to somebody who they can count on availability wise. And so I think Reynaud brings that. He brings the size, he brings the rebounding. Hopefully he's he's a little bit more mobile. He's not so clunky as we've seen other big men at that height, that size can be. But it makes sense. I think the Spurs have a need, and Reynald would definitely step in and fill that.
He's been getting player comps as for his ceiling as a Brook Lopez, which isn't that bad at all. It's not too shabby, obviously, but he'll need years and years and years to get there. It won't be that, instant season Brook Lopez, year one, should the Spurs select him. So all this feels good, right? Spurs fans, Locked On Spurs watchers right now, listeners, the Wemby connection, French, the Spurs are able to dip into that pool and, really cultivate that program out in France and, so on and so forth. But are there cons? Yeah, there's some cons. So we're going to talk about that coming up next right here on Locked On Spurs with Matt Guzman. He is with Spurs on Sports Illustrated. Be sure to follow him on X at MattGZMAN. Hey, I want to talk about FanDuel with NBA playoffs in full swing, and every night delivers a highlight-worthy performance, major momentum shifts, can't miss moments. Why not have fun with that with FanDuel? Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get on the action over at FanDuel. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game. Before tip up and live, you got player props, you got performance trends, you got same-game parlays. You have more ways than ever to play smart and win big with FanDuel. Well, perhaps you got a read on somebody who's heating up. Why not back it up with the same-game parlay? How could a $200 bonus in bets add to the assignment if your first $5 bet wins? We'll go find out over at FanDuel. Which players are showing up in the biggest moments? How could tracking their trends help you build your next bet? That's what FanDuel is there for. Look, if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. We're back right here on Locked On Spurs, joined by Matt Guzman with Spurs on Sports Illustrated. Follow him on X at MattGZMAN. Why is he here? We're talking about Maxime Raynaud, A lot of Spurs fans are clamoring for the Spurs to get him at 14. It makes sense. It's a big man. He's 7'1". He's, still young, 22 years old. He's Wemby's friend, all that good stuff. But as much as there's pros, there might be a lot more cons why the Spurs shouldn't get him at number 14. And right off the bat, Matt, let's talk about that. At number 14, that is just way too high for him, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a lot of people have been back and forth. And I think, if the Spurs go to Reynald with number 14, it means that they've really done their homework. They absolutely know that he's going to pan out. He's who they want to be next to Victor Wembanyama for years and years down the road. And I'm not so sure that they've seen enough to warrant using their pick. And we talked about trading down, maybe getting him at 17 or 18. But I mean, you're using a lottery pick. And I think it honestly has less to do with Reynald and more to do with who else they could get at number 14 or potentially trade up with the number 14 pick.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it might be a little bit of a stretch to use a lottery pick on somebody like that.
Yeah, exactly. The Spurs are going to target him. You're definitely going to see them move down and perhaps pick up a later pick if the Spurs do have him on their radar. Other thing too, well, first of all, it's not, look, if the Spurs were to pick him at 14, the crazier things have happened. Who would have thought Josh Primo would have gone at the number he went when the Spurs picked him? All right. So at least Brian Wright has shown that he's not afraid to pull the trigger on somebody that he believes has long-term value. But, that's for Holder. We all know what happened with Primo. But for Reynald, again, there are other limitations regarding him on the court. Now, as much as 14 may be a reach, and it probably is, there's this too. You look at, the three-point shooting. It's not the greatest, Matt, and that's what the Spurs need. They need an athletic big man that can stay around the paint, but can hit the occasional three shot. Reynald has not shown that, has he?
No, I mean, he's sitting at a 36%, which, I think he led or he was second place in some statistic of 3 points made by somebody 7 feet or over, and that's just, it's great for him because he can hit that occasional three, but I don't think you can rely on him to be a stretch big, in the way that term has been used and coined the past few years. You mentioned Brook Lopez. He's a stretch big. He's somebody who can hit a 3-pointer if you need him to. Maxime Raynaud has a ways to go before, they can count on him to get that 3-point shot to expand the floor a little bit. And so I think you're right. If they're looking at a center, at a big man next to Victor Wembanyama, they might want to go for somebody who can stretch the floor a little bit better than somebody who's been in college and will be a rookie next season with a lot more work to go down the road.
Absolutely. And as much as he has the size, height, 7'1", 1.4 blocks per game is not too impressive for a guy his size. I would expect a little bit more, closer to 2, like a solid 2, like a 1.8, maybe a 2 out in Stanford. And then there's that too, the level of competition. Stanford, again, no knock on that. It's still, pretty tough basketball, but it's not like it was a, high division, team playing against some of the best. So there's that as well. There's also too, with that lack of, at least dominant shot blocking, rim protection, the Spurs definitely need that. What else can we look at as far as why the Spurs shouldn't go with that is because there's other alternatives. And I think that's where I lean towards if the Spurs are going to address the big man spot. And that is a free agency pool. And then you can address that with a veteran like a Brook Lopez, like another veteran big man out there that can fill the void versus Reynald, who may be a little bit of a project. So when I look at the cons, Matt, I see, okay, that's good, Spurs, if y'all want Reynald, but I think you're better off going out and getting an available big man that's ready-made. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. And I think to your point, that's something that they're definitely going to look into is, who's available. We did a show about that a couple weeks ago.
Yep.
Which big men in free agency can they use to fill that void and have it work instantaneously? Because you've got Victor Wembanyama in year 3. Him and De'Aaron Fox have now had a full offseason together, or they will have by the time they hit the court. I think they're in a position where they're looking for a center who can be next to Victor Wembanyama and instantly impact it. If they still like Maxime Raynaud and they want to go get him a couple picks later, trade down, get him, and then sign somebody in free agency. Now he's got somebody to learn from. And if you want to make a project out of it, if you want to, there's other prospects in this draft class too that would be, project in the same right. And so I think, if they want one of those guys, you trade down, but I don't think you use a lottery pick to draft a project or somebody that you're hoping will pan out, years and years down the road. I think that they might look for something a little bit more immediate in terms of
Or if they are still looking for a big at 14, perhaps they just go with a different big that's available. Like you hear a name like Asa Newell. Maybe he could be the guy. Maybe not right now. Now we're not bashing Reynald. I mean, we did a whole segment on the pros, but it just when you weigh the balance, Spurs fans, it just comes down to maybe 14 is a reach. I'd say he could be a good NBA player. He probably will, but I think with number 14 pick, the Spurs are better suited either selecting a better projected player that has a better ceiling versus Reynald, who may be a little bit of a project. He's the type of guy, Matt, that I could see spending some time in Austin, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think whoever is picked with that 14, unless they're expecting them to be an immediate impact, I think a lot of people, or I think it's not crazy to see that person or that player spend some time in Cedar Park.
All right. So with that being said, Matt, give us your final verdict. Should the Spurs select Reynald at number 14?
I'm going to go with no. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to say no to selecting Reynald, but I'm not going to select him at number 14. Maybe that's my final verdict.
I'm with you right there. Nothing against the kid. If the Spurs do trade down and that's their target, I get it. Sure, go for it. It's kind of win-win. You trade down, you could perhaps you get a multiple picks in return. So it works for the Spurs, but at 14, that's still a reach. I think whoever picks them, because the Spurs or another NBA team, they're going to get a fine NBA player. It's just the Spurs on their direction right now. They need somebody who can help right now because, they got to start winning soon. And when you got a guy like Wemby and Fox and Castle and more than likely Harper, that's the making of a pretty good team in the works to have Reynald come and try to play catch up and keep up with these guys. I'll say he couldn't, but you'll still have to have a little bit of a project. You can't afford that right now. The Spurs cannot afford a project player right now. And his lack of 3-point shooting is what really seals it for me. That's what really gets it. We need a big that can stretch the floor. He's not it. All right. Those are our thoughts on Maxime Raynaud. What do y'all think, Spurs fans? Should the Spurs get him at 14? Should they trade down to get him? What are your thoughts? You let Matt know on X at MattGZMAN. You let me know by subscribing to Locked On Spurs wherever you get your favorite podcast. You want to do that right now. Speaking of that, we're going to talk about you guys, Locked On Spurs fan comments. What are y'all talking about over at the Locked On Spurs YouTube page? All right, we're back right here on Locked On Spurs, joined by Matt Guzman. He's with Spurs on Sports Illustrated. He's going to talk to you about that and more in just a few minutes. All right, Matt, we know you're pressed for time here, so let's go ahead and pull out a Locked On Spurs fan comment. Shock, you're right. A lot of people are talking about the draft. So a lot of
I guess it's coming up or something.
Harper this, Harper that. So let's see what Spurs fans are talking about right now. All right, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Who's a good one? All right, here's one. This is from Sarah McCoy, 1941. The commenter says, the Spurs will stick and pick. They will use the OKC formula to build their contender. The Spurs will be better than OKC because they have Wemby. What do you think about that? Do you think the Spurs ultimately will just stick and pick with number 2 and 14 and also 38 and just keep on cooking the way they're going? Or you think maybe they may try to skip some steps, Matt? What do you think?
Yeah, I think if there's anything we've learned, that skip steps is not really in the vocabulary of Brian Wright. Mm-hmm. And so I think, I wouldn't be surprised, if they do end up deciding just to pick 2 players at 2 and 14, mm-hmm. to pick a player in the second round as well and just, test him through the summer league, see if he's, worth keeping around. And I think, that's not necessarily a bad thing, to the commenter's point, Oklahoma City, Indiana, even, those are young teams without, much. Well, they have star power, right? But, you have a team like Phoenix who was way over the luxury tax, way over the threshold, and it missed the playoffs. But you have young teams like Oklahoma City who have done that rebuild slow and, low and slow, and it's worked for them. And I think the Spurs are definitely candidates to do that, especially with, like the commenter said, a Victor Wembanyama type talent. Mm-hmm. And so I think, De'Aaron Fox might have been as close as they got to skipping steps per se. Mm-hmm. But I would not be surprised if they end up picking 2 players at 2 and 14.
Yeah, history shows the Spurs normally just stick and pick. Look at that year. What was that? The year with Malachi and Wesley and Sohan. What were we all saying? Oh, the Spurs, they got 3 first-round picks. There's no way they're going to keep them. No way. They're going to deal them. Everybody was anticipating a deal, and nothing happened. The Spurs just kept on staying the course. Now you're hearing a lot of rumbling right now, Matt, that the number 2 pick is likely going to be Dylan Harper. It's going to be this, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's what the Spurs do. No big mega trade, unless the only thing I could think that can really skew things into making a trade is if maybe a Milwaukee comes off their alleged, Castle and the number 2 pick. Then maybe we can talk some business here, but other than that, you're going to need that type of player to coming back, like you're talking about a number 2 pick. So yeah, you're going to want a quality player like Giannis. So there's that. So, but other than all, yeah, I think the Spurs ultimately will stick and pick. And man, we just opened up some memory lane there. I remember the Wesley and Malachi. I remember everybody was just saying like, no, they're going to trade. They're going to trade. There's multiple first-round picks they're dealing, and nothing happened. And then I remember being at the Josh Primo draft. I remember that. I was there at Barclays. I had my feet up.
I'm sure that was an experience.
Yeah, I had my feet up, like on the desk, because when you ever covered an NBA draft, everybody, you get in the assigned seat, but like nobody's near you because everybody's on the floor or in the conference rooms. So I had like the entire row to myself, and I just put my feet up. I said, "All right, here comes the Spurs pick, and we get ready." And then they announced Josh Primo, and I was just sitting there like this. What? No, that can't be. And I knew they had worked them out, but I didn't think. You know what, man? I mean, is he even in the league anymore? I don't know if he's in the league.
I think he signed on with someone.
Really? All right. It's like Bryn Forbes. I think Bryn Forbes is somewhere in South America. Did you hear about that?
I did actually. Okay, so I just found out he's in Canada. He's a Canadian basketball player, but he was with the Bulls G League last I heard, which I think was middle of last season.
Well, there you have it. Yeah. There's your Josh Primo update, everybody, and Bryn Forbes update. Yeah. Well, out of the United States, apparently. One in Canada, one in South America. But all right.
Crazy.
Matt, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you got to kind of talk and run, but nevertheless, tell us what's going on at Spurs on Sports Illustrated. What you got cooking over there?
Yeah, well, I'm finally wrapping up my little look back feature on Malachi Flynn, Mr. 50-pointer. So kind of give a little bit of a boost to the Austin Spurs coverage that I like to do, that I find fun. But yeah, that's in the next couple of days here, and then obviously going to go speak to Blake Wesley here in a few minutes, and hopefully we have an update on how his offseason's been going. So
yeah, absolutely. I heard you dropped 52 points though against Malachi. Is that true?
Against Malachi? No, not quite. I had 58.
Oh, okay. There you go. See, look at that, Matt. See, we were popping his collar at 58. Yeah. Tell Flynn that. See how he reacts to that.
I'll let him know. Yeah, let him know.
Right, go.
On a real note, Jeff, my actual personal best, I played at the rec league at college, and I got 36 one game. So I was pretty proud of that one. Yeah.
Do you have one of those in the zone moments where like everything?
Oh, absolutely. I had like 5 threes, and then I kept. Yeah, it was just ridiculous. I brought out some celebrations I'd never done before. It's a great moment. So
I remember having one of those in high school. Where a bunch of the guys were playing, like, when during our summer vacation, my dad came out with me. He wanted to play, and we were playing. And I got hot. I was hitting threes. I was hitting. Nobody could hit. Nobody could guard me. Nobody could guard me. And then this guy was playing with the other team, the other high school friends, but didn't go to high school. We just needed a player. We just looked around like, y'all want to play somebody, and that other team picked this guy, and he did the old school 80s way. He tried to shut me down by ramming himself into me. Mm-hmm. So he rammed himself into me, and I remember flopping and falling down and like, oh, what's it? Well, I got so mad. I remember getting up and just running towards him. And I remember getting chest to chest with him. And then next thing I know, I see my dad like dive in, and I try to separate me from him. But I was so mad, but learned to listen though.
To that?
No. There were no refs. We caught our own fouls.
Okay.
But I remember though, that was it though. I learned a valuable lesson there. I let somebody get in my head, and I couldn't get back hot streak back going. So he did his job. He got in my head. So he took me out mentally, but never again. I want revenge. He's probably like 80 now. So I'm going to get him back at 80 years old. I'm going to rearrange his medicines in his medicine cabinet.
Oh, you should, right?
I'm going to do that to him. But all right, Matt, thank you again for taking time out of your schedule to join us here on Locked On Spurs. Everybody else, we'll be back tomorrow. Yeah, talking all things silver and black. Rudy Campos is coming back on to wrap up the week right here on Locked On Spurs. let's just say Kevin Durant talk is going to be popping up again. Yeah, we're going to catch up with the latest on that and more tomorrow on Locked On Spurs. And for your next show, listen, I should say, check out Locked On NBA Big Board. You go on YouTube, go find it, Locked On NBA Big Board. Get the host, Rafael Barlow, catch up with the latest interviews, rumors, et cetera, leading up to the NBA draft. But for Matt Guzman, I am Jeff Garcia. We're going to put a lock in this episode of Locked On Spurs.